It's a genuine pleasure to have you in our audience. I want to talk to you today about what I conceive to be one of the very most important subjects to which the human mind can address itself. And even though our lesson is going to be directed toward what the New Testament teaches us who are living today to do, I want to use as a text a passage from the Old Testament. Of course, we who live today are not living under the law of Moses, the Old Testament. That law was nailed to the cross, and we now live under the gospel of Jesus Christ. But the principles by which God acted in the Old Testament are the same principles by which he acts today. It's just that the details of the teaching are some different. Now let us notice in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 26 to 28. And I'll be reading from the American Standard Version. Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if ye shall hearken unto the commandments of Jehovah your God, which I command you this day. And the curse, if ye shall not hearken unto the commandments of Jehovah your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, to go after other gods which ye have not known. Now you see, God there gave man the choice. Choose you this day which way you will go. Will you follow the plan that I give you, or will you follow the plan of merely some man, eventually of Satan? Every plan that man has that is not the plan of God has its basic origin in Satan. And so we looked at the title of our study today, Which Plan Works, Man's or God's? God has only one plan for man today, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. No other covenant, even of the Bible, is the means by which we can be saved. The principles that applied in the Old Testament, they apply in the New, but the details are not the same. Which plan works, man's or God's? I envision here a drawing board with a T-square used by an architect and some sort of engineer, a draftsman, to bring about a plan that others can understand and follow, and perhaps make something, an airplane, a pump, an automobile, whatever. But God's plan is the thing that is in antagonism to the plans of men. The plans of men are in antagonism to the plans of God. There's a passage in Matthew chapter 21, verses 23 to 37. And the Jewish leaders came to Jesus and asked him in regard to the baptism of John. They asked him, by what authority doest thou these things? The things that you're doing, by what authority are you doing them? And Jesus said, before I answer your question, I want to ask you one. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? They got off to the side and talked it over, and they said, if we say from men, then we are afraid of the people, because they all hold that John is a prophet. If we say that that baptism was from God, then he will say, why then didn't you obey him? So you see, they were put into what we call a dilemma. They didn't know which way to go. They were hung on either horn they might choose. And so they came back to Jesus, and not telling the truth, of course, said, we don't know. And Jesus replied to them, then I will not tell you the answer to the question you ask me. If people show dishonesty, there is really no use in dealing with them. The Bible is easy to understand if a person is honest. And so we come to the point of asking again, which plan works, man's or God's? As a sort of an introductory thing, I want us to note that everything we believe and do in religion is either by a man's plan or it is by God's plan. You cannot follow the plan devised by any man, something that some man thought of, perhaps is written in a book or has preached it, and it's something other than the plan of God, and it be pleasing to God. That's the point. That's the study that we're after today. It is simply not true, as we hear on almost every hand, that so long as a man is sincere and religious, good moral man perhaps, it doesn't matter what he preaches, or what he does for his own soul's salvation, if it's not the plan of God, it won't work. I think you'll be able to see, if you never have seen it before, if you'll have your own Bible handy and study with me as we go through this, you'll see that what I'm telling you on this matter is true. The plans of men always fail. Moses made clear that there were two choices, either to follow the plan of God or to follow the plan of men. And he indicated that if you follow the plan of man, you'll result in a curse. I set before you this day a blessing and a curse, Moses said. A blessing if you follow God's plan, and a curse if you follow a man's plan. That same thing in principle is true today. If you follow God's plan, the gospel of Christ, which is addressed to everybody on this earth, then you'll be saved. And if you live the faithful Christian life in obedience to that gospel, you'll be saved with God in eternity. But if you follow a plan of men, it will not result in your salvation. You may be thinking, well, that's true of you also. Of course it is. If I'm not preaching the plan of God, I will rest under the curse of God. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 to 9. If I'm not living the gospel of Christ, I will rest under the anathema of God. That's true of all of us. The thing that we need to impress upon our mind is, must we be in subservience to God by obeying His will? Is it really necessary for us to become a Christian and to live as a faithful Christian to follow God's plan? This passage makes clear in principle that you must follow God. But we'll see as we go along from the New Testament this same basic truth. Now let's look for a moment at types of truth. Truth is taught in the Bible by precept. That is, it just says something in so many words. We have an explicit statement, so many words. Those statements will imply other things that are not stated explicitly. At other times we have what some people call examples, but which are really accounts of action, where somebody says, well, this prophet went over to that land and did thus and so, and God was pleased with him, or He was not pleased with him. That is an account of action. And so let's look first of all at proof by precept. And I have there on the chart 3 passages, but I want to look at only one of them, and I hope that you will jot down the other 2 and study them for yourselves. In Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 to 9, the Apostle Paul expresses amazement that the Christians at Galatia, of the Galatian congregations, were drifting away from the gospel of Christ into accepting another gospel, which is not another gospel. He's there saying, you're accepting another gospel of a different kind, but you're not accepting another gospel of the same kind. The gospel of Christ is the power of God unto salvation. But the gospel of any man, any message that he claims will be the gospel, will not save you. It will rest only, or bring you to the point of resting only under the anathema of God. And he went on to make clear that even if an apostle or an angel were to preach unto you any gospel other than that which was preached unto you, let him be anathema. Think about that for a moment, my friends. If you are not following the gospel of Christ, you will rest under the curse of God. Now let's look hurriedly. We'll have to do this in a big hurry. Proof by example. Adam and Eve, they followed their own plan. They followed the plan that the serpent gave them, and they were under the anathema of God. They were cast out of the garden. The people of Noah's day, who would not be obedient to God. Of all the people on earth at that time, only 8 people, Noah and his family, were saved. That shows if you have not understood the severity of God, as we find in the 11th chapter of Romans in the 22nd verse, behold then the goodness and the severity of God. And what it amounts to is this, that God's goodness flows to those who are obedient, and His severity flows to those who are not. The people of Noah's day were lost because they were not obedient. Cain did not act by faith, in contrast to his brother Abel, and he was resting under the anathema of God. King Saul was disobedient, and he was punished severely. His days he was shut off from being king. Israel refused to go into the promised land, even under the direction of Caleb and Joshua. Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire that God had not authorized them to use in the offering of sacrifice. And the fire came forth from heaven and devoured them in a moment. You see how that ought to help us to see that we cannot follow the plan of our own devising.